Hello everyone, and welcome back for those that have joined us before. I'm Kirsty Smith, the Head of Development and Alumni Relations at Brunel University, London, and thrilled to have you all with us for our third lockdown learning session. So our aim of the lockdown learning was to motivate and inspire you and hopefully give you some tools and key takeaways that you can use during this extraordinary time. We're super lucky to have such a range of alumni that have also offered their time. So if you are watching this and you also think you have a topic that you'd like to talk about and share with other people, then please get in touch. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to my colleague, Andrew.
Hi everyone, so I'm Andrew Williams. Keeley, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide. So I am your host for today, and I'll take you through a few bits of housekeeping first. For anyone who's not joined us before, welcome. And for anyone who has, you've probably seen that my picture's developing a lot since the one on the screen, since being in lockdown. But the webinar is being recorded, just for you all to know. Participants have entered on mute, but you can record on the chat. You can kind of talk to each other in the chat box. And if you have any questions whilst we go along, please do put them in, and we'll make sure that they get answered at the end. So there'll be a bit of time for Q&A once Keeley's gone through her initial presentation. Okay, so without any more chat, I'm going to introduce Keeley. So Keeley Taverner is a Brunel alumna. She is a psychotherapist, and she's going to be running this session on pain into purpose, rethinking mental health. So having some really great conversations with Keeley before, I'm sure this is going to be a great session. So over to you, Keeley.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to all. Thank you for your introduction, Andrew. As he mentioned, I am Keeley Taverner, and I am now practicing as a psychotherapist, coach, author, basically a creative, and just finding a way to keep bringing my ideas to life, but in doing so, also helping people along their life journey and where it takes them. So I'm the author of 3 books, and basically one of the reasons why I'm an advocate of pain to purpose is because it's been my story. And so I think that really equips me well to be able to help people to change, because for me, you know, this hasn't been about me reading loads of books. It's been about my own experience, then going to books, then going to study to understand. Yes, I am a Brunel graduate, to be able to understand, like, what was I going through? So before I do that, one of the first things I do for anyone I work with is I'd like you to name 3 things you dislike about yourself. Don't want you to overthink it, just like 1, 2, 3. The first things that come to mind. 3 things you dislike about yourself. Write those down, just jot those down. We're going to come back to that a little bit later on. And one of the reasons why I'm an advocate of us naming things that we don't like about ourselves, because that has been my story. I didn't like myself, and by the time I got into adulthood, my self-hatred was replicated in my intimate relationships. So I grew up in a council estate in Brent called St. Raph's Estate. I grew up with a single mum. I am mixed, I'm dual heritage, so my mum's black and my dad's white, and my dad lived in the suburbs, and I grew up with mum, what would I say? I think the urban vernacular is on the ends, but typically people would say, you know, like at the bottom of the social class. By the time I was 16, I got my first job at IKEA, where I stayed for 10 years, and I was on the checkout. Yes, I was the girl telling you to put the yellow bag behind, you need to get yourself a blue bag. That was my duty. And for me, I call it my yellow bag epiphany, when there's this part of me, this voice spoke to me inside, and I just knew I could do better than what I was doing for myself. Something inside me just knew I could do better. I too was a single parent by the time I was 20. I had 2 kids, and I was also in an abusive relationship. And so I began to read self-help books. one of the first self-help books I read was by Jan Van Sant, and it was called In the Meantime. And it was first place I realized I had to take responsibility for myself in terms of the situation that I was in. And that's where I discovered that I was actually in love with a narcissist. And so I became really curious about narcissism and what that meant. So my inquiry took me to Stanmore College, where I did an access to education course because I'd left school with no GCSEs. And then I got into Brunel after having to do a maths exam because I didn't have C in maths. I was baffled why I had to have a GCSE in maths, but as soon as I started to do statistics, I understood why we needed to have maths. I graduated from Brunel with a degree in psychology in 2007. And I then began looking for jobs. And because I'd done the placement year at Brunel, I developed a relationship with the staff at Wormwood Scrubs. And in 2007, in the same year, I began working there for probation. But within the first year, I quite quickly realized that my ambition to help others to make a difference was somewhat difficult because there was so much form filling. There was so much of an emphasis on getting statistics, I guess, to evidence that we were being effective as a team. So what I did by 2008, I started to study a master's at Brunel Institute in Ealing. And what I chose to do was an area of psychology I'd learned at Brunel, which was about person-centered psychotherapy. I was always fascinated by Rogers, because what Rogers was speaking about in terms of human suffering and human healing, it spoke to my own story. However, my mentor at the time, being that I'd come from a council estate, I was the first person in my family to go to university. My mentor encouraged me to do CBT because she felt that that would get me the job and, you know, I'd be able to thrive far more easily. But there was something inside me that just knew, and I made my own decision to study Rogers. So how I've gone from kind of working for probation, working in prisons, to having my own business is when the riots were happening in 2011, the same day the riots had kicked off, I got a letter from probation saying that I was going to be made redundant because they were making cuts, which was the bizarrest thing because prisons were full, the courts were full, people were steepling in police stations. So I couldn't quite work out why they were making us redundant. So that I felt incredibly disempowered by that. I passionately pursued my education. I was passionate about making a difference. So what I did was when they invited us to this redundancy meeting, we were allowed to go and see a coach. And it was when I saw that coach that I talked about an idea I had for my own business. And I think also training at Brunel, which was in an affluent area, having your own business was something that was really normal to the people I trained around. So it pushed my aspirations up. And so I basically didn't like the power that they had over me. And I saw Key for Change as a way for me to become empowered. And I registered my business in 2012. So I'm contemporary. What makes sense to me about human suffering is my area of interest, really. So some of the popular people that inspire my thinking are people like Bruce Lee. He came up with this, some people argue he's a philosopher, which is to be like water. And I remember hearing about that from a prisoner, and I just kind of followed what he spoke about and loved what he had to say about life and going with the flow and stop fighting upstream. Oprah, based on my first self-help book, Oprah was instrumental. You know, as a girl, for a grassroots girl, I wasn't going to go and pay for therapy, but being encouraged to buy a self-help book was something I could definitely do. And I still keep up with her podcasts and so on. Currently, like Russell Brand, I really appreciate, you know, how he speaks about addiction. And I find that contemporary insights just very helpful. And I refer a lot of my clients onto him. Now, being that I'm mixed, I'm from an urban background, you know, I also want to speak about people like music. Music has been very influential in my life. I've always liked Nas. I found Nas to be a very intellectual rapper. And some would argue that because he doesn't talk about, you know, big booties and shaking it down, that he doesn't get the prominence that he deserves. Some of you may know about Dr. Wayne Dyer. I was also found out about him through Oprah and Nipsey Hussle. So Nipsey Hussle was shot recently in LA last year. And as I've learned more about his story, I've just appreciated, you know, his graft, he has products, he has music, and I just really appreciated his insights. And lastly, Jordan Peterson. Yes, he's controversial, but what I really appreciate the interview with Kathy Newman. Like, that was amazing. It was beautiful to see psychologists in mainstream media being able to articulate the reason why there is, you know, inequality. But what I also like is he talks about order and chaos, the yin and the yang, and that really speaks to me in terms of the work that I do. From a theoretical perspective, I'm basically a lover of the humanistic viewpoint, positive psychology. So like Maslow's hierarchy of need, and we know that there's been an addition to that of late with Wi-Fi. However, self-actualization is really the aspect of human potential that has always intrigued me and infuses and inspires my work. So I think anyone who comes to me as a client knows that I don't come from human deficits model of humanity. I'm very much interested in self-actualization, becoming your greatest self, and the humanistic viewpoint. One of the people who I absolutely love, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, is a book for me that illustrates the importance of choice in any adverse situation we find ourselves in. So that's me, that's about me, that's what inspires my thinking. And now, if you've noted down the 3 things you don't like about yourself, what I'd like you to think about, don't overthink it, is the 3 things you like about you. What do you like about the person you are? And this is fundamental to any review. When I meet somebody in my initial consultations, I always ask these questions. And this was inspired by my work in prison, because I remember one day working with someone who was particularly angry, and he was frightening. He was so frightening, I had sweat at the back of my kneecaps, and I've never ever had sweat there before. So this guy took me into another realm. And I just remember he was so versed at knowing what he was bad at. The way that I was able to have a breakthrough with him was actually by naming what was good about him. That made a tough man crumble, I noticed. And I never forgot that I thanked him for being so honest. And I also thanked him for being truthful with me. And that seemed to have a profound impact. And I think one of the challenges with any clients I work with is that we are very versed about what we don't like about ourselves. We can wax lyrical, yet when it comes to naming, what do you like about who you are? I often watch people repeat the question back to me as if it didn't compute. And I kind of think, I know you know that question, but what I know is that you are not used to thinking about what you like about yourself. So that's something I encourage you to think about. What do you like about you? Because this shows up often in our intimate relationships, and that's the area that I specialize in. So where I'm at in terms of turning pain into purpose, and I think if I was to choose to do a doctorate, this is definitely the way that I would go. Pain is an inevitable part of life. This touches on existentialism. The more we can accept this fact, the more we can reject this notion that we are going to live in a perpetual state of happiness once we have the car, the house, the partner, and the fancy bag to boot, is the best lives can be. Pain is a natural part of life. However, what is fundamental is how we respond to difficult situations in our lives. It can either make you or it can break you. And the reason I'm a massive advocate of this is because, again, it's been my story. It's been my journey. You know, there are people who I've grown up with who also, like myself, had 2 kids at a young age, and our lives have taken very different choices. Some would argue that that's because I've had access to white privilege, being that I have my dad and he lives in a middle class area, and there is something to be said about that. But it never negates personal choice and personal conviction about whatever circumstance we find ourselves in. How can we make our pain purposeful is always the key. And yes, we all have different access points to opportunity. So what I've created, and this is a workshop that, well, it's actually a course that I run, is that there are 5 good life pillars. The first one is self-responsibility. We have to learn to become responsible for ourselves and the consequences of our actions. This can be pretty difficult for people to get their head around. But once I did, life started to make sense. For example, if we keep blocking and unblocking the guy that's no good for us, that gives us a headache, that gives us stress, but we keep inviting them back into our lives, then we are actually contributing to our own pain. Acceptance. The phrase goes, it is what it is. When we don't accept, life hurts. When we accept situations as they are, it doesn't mean we're skippy about things. However, we free ourselves. The next life principle is the importance of surrender. Letting go of what you can't control. So many of us are holding on to situations, people that actually is not working for us, but for whatever reason, we don't want to let it go. And as such, we suffer. The 4th good life pillar is self and body awareness. The Body Keeps the Score. That's another great book. Becoming self-aware, tuning into your inner voice is invaluable, because your inner voice is your internal navigation system. If we're not aware of the things we say to ourselves, if we're cruel and we have a harsh inner critic, life will be difficult. So I encourage my clients to develop what I call the inner Care Bear. I got him here. This is the inner Care Bear. This is about how do we become compassionate with ourselves. And lastly, faith. What I've found throughout my teachings, whether working for probation, working for within the prison, is that faith doesn't get the kudos it needs in terms of being a change agent. Now, what I'm not talking about is not organized religion, Bible bashing, ramming opinions down people's throat. But anytime you want to change, you're going to have to be dealing with uncertainty. And faith is of the utmost importance to help you through that process. I know for me, coming from my estate, wanting better for myself, I had to have faith, because for so many times I was knocked back, rejected. You know, in the prison service, I applied for bigger jobs, never got them. But there had to be faith inside of me to get where I've got. There's a song that goes, there's something inside so strong, I know that I can make it. So these kind of words, music, whatever lifts your spirit is something that I have doused myself with. Affirmations, you know, making sure I turn off the news in order to keep my faith high and to sort of circumnavigate what reality stereotypes have been telling me. And so when you have the 5 life principles, I can also make predictions often for people who come to see me for therapy, is that the unhappy life pillars are usually at interplay when someone comes to see me. So basically, we don't take responsibility for our situation. We don't quite realize how we get ourselves into situation. And so, you know, there's no judgment about that. It's obviously people are coming to help for me to help. So we don't quite, just like me, when I felt like I loved my daughter's dad, I couldn't see how that actually caused me a raft of problems. But actually, if he was abusive and I kept going back. So it's important that self-responsibility is essential if we want to live the good life. Another aspect is if we don't accept, then we're in a state of non-acceptance. When we're in a state of non-acceptance, We are fighting the stream. We are trying to swim upstream. And that is, if I touch on epigenetics, energy flow. Where your energy flows, attention goes. So often we don't want to accept, for example, the boyfriend that doesn't want to commit to us. So at some level, we go on campaign, convince that person that I am the one. In the end, sisters, we end up hurting ourselves. We end up hurting ourselves. Acceptance. In the face of surrender, the opposite would be we get very rigid. We dig our heels in and we want things on our terms. Fair enough, but life doesn't work like that. That will, again, that consumes our energy. We get stubborn and we can be hell-bent on getting things our own way. And this causes people no end of pain and suffering. In addition, if we're not self-aware, then we're going to be unaware. We're going to be walking blind and we will not understand how we contribute to our own pain and suffering and calamities in life. So I'm all about helping people. What we do is we look at the nuance in your behavior. I call it notice what you notice. And my thinking around that is infused by EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming, which is the work I do with people who have experienced trauma. And fear, well, fear is a massive one, and it's also connected, profoundly connected to our inner voice. So for my perfectionists out there, if you're particularly brutal with yourself, if your to-do list never ends and then you beat up on yourself because you've not achieved X, Y, Z, this is an aspect that we have to work with, because when we live in fear, we focus on finding, we usually end up more things to be fearful about. And so I am of the view at the current time, as I work out my theory, that the antidote to fear is faith. So those are my viewpoints. And what I've noticed, and my assistant and I have been trying to put this into a visual diagram, this is the best I could do at the current time, is that when you live by the 5 good life principles, you start to occupy this space outside of the comfort zone, which I call our comfort zone is often our stagnation zone, is where we stagnating, we're doing the same things over and over and experiencing the same pain. So when we come out of that, when we live by the 5 good life principles, we start to pursue our interest. We start to put our energy into situations we have control. And that means you might need to go and do the flamenco dancing if your spirit resonates with that. Sometimes we've got these little dreams and aspirations, but we never give ourselves permission. So for all my high achievers, I have a whole raft of high achievers who I support. If you need to go and play the banjo because your parents wouldn't let you play the banjo when you was 5 because you had to do advanced maths, you gotta go and play the banjo. And sometimes I feel like I have to give people permission to say yes to themselves. And by the time they're ready for leave therapy, they give themselves permission. So this is something that I'm really proud of, but it really captures what life is like when we begin to move outside of that stagnation zone, when we surrender and let go. Often the biggest challenge is fear, our relationship with fear. And so fundamentally, what I believe is that everything is energy. And when we are depressed, when we are anxious, when we are stressed, often we end up unconsciously channeling our energy into situations we cannot control. And that energy only propels back into us. And so the opposite is when we live by the good life principles, our energy is freed up for creativity. Creativity don't mean you're an artist. So many people are like, I'm not an artist, I can't draw. It's not about that. It's about the fact that you can create. If it means you go and you create dance moves at your flamenco class, that's creativity. Your energy is expelled somewhere else. So you leave Derek alone, who won't commit to you. You leave Derek and you decide, you know what? I'm putting my energy somewhere else. I'm a salsa tonight. And so my last slide before I go is honing in on one of the good life principles. And this one, because of social media, comes up again and again and again. And because I'm very contemporary, I'm quite young for a therapist. what I encourage people to do is to, WhatsApp was coming up again and again in a therapy room. Like, it was like client after client, whether old, young, in between, we're talking about WhatsApp, family WhatsApp groups, the stress it gives them, feeling bullied in WhatsApp group, feeling ignored in WhatsApp group. So I thought to myself as a creative, what could I create to assist people? And what I came up with is 15 tips to help people to stay sane on WhatsApp. And so what I'm going to encourage you to do is to look at your last 10 contacts on your WhatsApp list. If you don't have WhatsApp, you could think about looking at your contacts list, like on your phone, the last people that contacted you. Now, I've used emojis here, but what I would like you to notice is, what reaction do you have when you see Moaning Mildred's name on your device? What happens to you? Oh, do you sigh? Do you go like, oh God, like the body is a truth teller. It don't lie, When I see my mum, I just think, oh, here we go. She's running out of puzzles, and so I have to keep buying her puzzles. So I know, like, I roll my eyes. The body is communicating with you, yeah? What I'd like you to do after you note down those 10 contacts, note down the emojis that speak to you, or use your own emojis, because emojis are really great, especially for people who are not emotionally literate for whatever reason. Maybe you live in your head. Emojis are very helpful. Then I want you to note down your thoughts. What do you say about those people? What is it, like a one-line sentence? What is it about those people? Why do they have that reaction on you? And if you find, for example, you have a Debbie Downer in your phone, the person, no matter what's going well for you, she can always spoil your parade. What is one action that you might need to take to just create a little bit of distance? These are the things that I help clients to explore, because, for example, staying friends with people on Facebook who upset you, where you feel annoyed, is actually not good for your mental health. So that we begin to take small actions to best protect ourselves. And that, in my view, is acts of self-care, acts of self-love. It's no longer really about getting our nails done like we used to before. We're up in the ante. We have to audit our devices, because so much of our triggers are in our devices. So that is a whistle-stop tour of my working theory about human suffering and human greatness. So I'm all about the human potential model of human psychology. So, yep, I would welcome any questions and any thoughts about my vision. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Keeley. And there's some questions coming in already, so we've got something to look forward to here. But just to kind of give you an overview, we've had over 100 participants in this call here today, which is fantastic, because one of the reasons we wanted to bring people together this week was, with it being Mental Health Awareness Week, we wanted to put something on. So it's really great that we've got people engaging. So Keeley, I'm going to start with the questions coming in. I've got a question from Varun. So the question is, how can we use techniques discussed today to support colleagues dealing with mental health issues in relation to isolation felt during the COVID-19 lockdown?
Well, I think there's one which is about, we also have to know if our help is worsley, because sometimes, as a do-gooder myself, prison taught me this, is sometimes I can go in and try to rescue people, but what is also going on for that person? So we have to check in with people. I would also recommend using the coaching, the open questions, what, when, where, how, to gauge from somebody what they also want, before we sweep in with our great ideas about what we think would be helpful for someone, often without. So that's one of the things which it seeps back into self-responsibility. However, no man stands alone. But I think there's also something of importance in terms of checking out what that person wants.
Okay, sorry, just checking I've not lost connection. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Keeley. So the next question comes from Ruthie. She has asked, what's the best way of not relapsing back into the comfort zone?
Well, I guess the challenge is the thing is sometimes we will, and that's a given. But at least you know that's the benefit of self-awareness. That if you know you're in your stagnation zone, you know, because it's uncomfortable, life gets humdrum. So I've realized the more I come out of my comfort zone, is new zone becomes the new zone. Does that make sense? So your comfort zone expands, but you'll have a reaction to monotony, to sameness, that will evoke an awareness in you, like, what do I need to do next? What is it that I want?
Okay, I'm having a bit of connection issue on my side, I think. So Keeley, I hope everyone heard that answer. But the next question comes from Laura. How do you encourage clients to maintain their motivation to make changes?
I don't. That's not my responsibility. People come to me in pain. It's like if there's a peg in your shoe and it's irritating you, you have to knock it out. I don't motivate people. People self-motivated because they've tried, usually by the time they've come to me, they've tried everything else. They got the Gucci bag, the Prada bag, the belt, they've got the house, they've got the car, they've had other experiences of therapy. So usually people come because they're in pain. So it's not my duty to motivate anybody. People are naturally motivated because they want better for themselves. There's something in them. I believe we all have a gift. There's a dream. There's a seed, something in it. Doesn't leave them alone. People come to me because they want to discover who they truly are. I don't motivate for that. People are motivated by their discomfort. Does that make sense?
Yes, so thank you for that one. So the next question comes from Trevor. How does acceptance and commitment therapy overlap with your ideas?
I did that when I was working on the Gren project. Acceptance and commitment, well, I guess commitment would be going back to responsibility. You know, what do I want to do? What do I want to be? What do I need to take responsibility for in my life? So this is about, for some of us, not all, but there's also, you know, another aspect is victim consciousness. A lot of people get stuck in victim consciousness. Poor me, look what happened. And I could have done that. Oh, look, I'm from an estate. I'm disadvantaged. Yeah, I was, two ways about it. But, you know, if I stayed a perpetual victim, and I see this in some of my peers who I grew up amongst, then you repeat the pattern because nothing's your fault. So I would say about commitment, it's about how do I make a commitment to me, commitment to self, a commitment to my own greatness.
Okay, thank you. So David has asked, how do we support those on furlough, please?
Well, I guess it would be important. How do you support people on furlough? I guess it's people to be able to be utter about the fact that they're not comfortable. Because, I mean, if, for example, if this is an employer, then it would be that you might create a support group. You might, you know, I guess I don't understand the context, but if people are going through, the challenge with what we're going through now, we're all going through it, but it's all dependent on our own personal circumstances. And so I think the challenge is, if we abdicate self-responsibility, there's a massive challenge with that. You know, there's a massive challenge with that. And, you know, there's a lot I could say about the whole model of like the mental health model, where it actually encourages a lack of self-responsibility. You know? So I mean, for many people who come to see me who are on medication, Well, if you take medication, then you know, but if you've still got those in your phone who unsettle you, then what choices are we making? So it's a there's a real challenge to that. But there's a context of an employer. It would be, you know, what do they need? What services, what support do they need to put out for people? And if you're, for example, someone who is about your other people around you, well, we also have to be curious. Is that concern, or is it their concern? Because sometimes gooders, is what I was often called in the prison, is we're hypersensitive to everybody else's needs. Sometimes they don't have a need. That's our need to be needed often. We might have a need to be needed. And if you have a need to be needed, life can be tricky.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keeley. Just for everyone else now, I've got a list of 5 questions. So I think with timing, there'll be the final questions that I go through with Keeley. But if you have any other questions, then maybe there might be other opportunities to talk to Keeley. So the next question comes from Yas, who has asked, if I feel a sense of dread, when I try to come out of the comfort zone, despite knowing it's good for me, how do I make that go away?
Meditation. You're attached to the mind. So it's going to have something to say. Your inner voice is going to be kicking off. So for me, I would be very curious. Meditation is one way to still the mind. Get my apparatus here. So when we fear, there's usually a harsh inner critic. I call my harsh inner critic Cruella de Vil. You see, I befriend minds, and I know when it comes up. So I become very aware, very alert. I think, oh, here she comes. I'm about to try and get out of the zone. Here she comes with all the things that could go wrong. So the key to fear is to access the inner voice. Nice to yourself, or are you brutal? You know, for so many of us, we are brutal person in their voice that thinks of the worst case scenarios. Often it's an internalized, not always, parents. Now, come on, we love our parents, here to humiliate them, but sometimes they've caused us a whole raft of problems. This is what I help people to understand.
Thank you, Keeley.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I refer to Russell Brand, because Russell Brand, like, he's talking about meditation is absolutely profound. How he's changed his life is profound.
Okay, so the next question comes from Omalad. So how do you deal with OCD, anxiety, intrusive thoughts during lockdown if no one has gone through it before?
Well, again, OCD is a need to be in control. You know, that's about controlling what, you know, often it stems from us being in a situation where we've had no control. So I think if you're experiencing, you know, intrusive thoughts and so on and so forth, I think that's where you need to start to think about how you're going to best help yourself. Now, I'm gonna be very, you know, the people I help, what we say are the worried well. If situations have gone too far, here at Key for Change, I refer to the psychologists, I refer to psychiatrists, because there's a spectrum of wellness. And if things are too far down the spectrum, it's also prudent for me that I refer on. So, you know, I think all of that needs to really be unpicked, because the OCD is an outcome of something deeper. If you're focused on the OCD, this is the tip of the iceberg. What is going on? What's gone on at a deeper level? And usually OCD is about someone trying to have a sense of control. So it makes sense, but then you have to work out, well, what was the situation where there wasn't control?
Okay, thank you. And we've now got a question from Jane, who's got a BSc in psychology and she works in an FE college. She helps students to find work, and many of them struggle with their mental health and not knowing what to do with their lives. Do you work with teenagers? And in your opinion, what is missing in education?
Well, if you really want to know my truth, spirituality has been taken out of everything, you see. And so the principles I've spoken about in the 5 Life model are spiritual principles, not religion, not rammed down people's throats, but they are spiritual principles, which is when, you know, there was no spirituality in any of the psychology that I studied. When I went to do my MSc, when I began to speak about my relationship with a higher power, I was laughed at. So I squashed it. However, I've discovered transcendental psychology. And so what happens is people don't have faith. What happens now is people value themselves according to the labels, the brands, the car they drive. Their sense of self is derived from these material objects. So people don't know who they truly are. Yes, I do work with a whole raft of people. I work with young people, I work with agencies. I think the challenge is, you know, working in prison is, what do people love? What lights their fire? One of the things that I have at my website is a bucket list, 101 things to do before you die. And you give someone a bucket list, ooh, you see them come alive. Oh, I want to fly an airplane. Client last week was just like, I can't believe I still want a salsa dance. I've been wanting to do that for years. I can't believe it's still in me. People discover themselves. They discover aspects of themselves. They discover parts of themselves that have been pushed away. And one of the reasons why I came up with that bucket list was because in prison, so many of the guys just wanted to like be a rapper, get a big house, have a fat car. And you're like, geez, I got to try and expand their thinking a little more, which is where doing a bucket list helped. You know, so we have to be careful, because sometimes in government agencies, they're giving us this kind of dry, wooden, approved by the psychologists material to work with. But for some, it just doesn't engage people. We don't engage them. I've always found, which is probably why I always got in trouble at work, was I wanted to engage people at a level that engaged them. And I think that's because I'm a grassroots girl. And I would have been intimidated by people who spoke in lofty terms. It wouldn't have worked for me. So I think that's one of the things that has been very helpful. One of the reasons why I work for myself is that I make things very relatable, so people can be like, yeah, that, I get that, that's me, you know. And a bucket list is one way to engage people. If you're interested, go to my website and you can download that.
Okay, conscious of time, thank you, Keeley. If a person, if a person finds social media overwhelming and taxing to their mental health, how do you advise they navigate professional social media networking on LinkedIn to build opportunities and move forward?
Well, just use LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is fairly tame. I don't think people are talking about their life dilemmas or showing off their new booty or their new boobs on LinkedIn. If they are, they're on the wrong forum for starters. So I think one of the ways you can do that is you do LinkedIn, you know. Don't be following no hot bods on the gram.
Okay, and last question then. Why do some people have a pattern of refusing to commit, always thinking something better is just round the corner? How do you encourage them to be realistic and be happy with what they have without killing their dreams for themselves?
That sounds like you know more about the person than you know about yourself. That sounds like a woman who has a partner who she wants to commit to them. And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm in private practice, because there isn't enough attention on love and relationships. You know, when I was working for probation, there was not enough attention on love and relationship. People choose what you think is something wrong for somebody else. It's not wrong for them. They're actually okay. And some people are all right in their own misery. So us do-gooders come along with our whistles and bells and want to make things better. But actually, some people are okay with their life as it is. And the challenge is we don't want to accept it because we see potential in people. And I used to have this problem. I used to see potential in guys all the time, always got loads of potential. Yeah, but potential needs a whole raft of other qualities: determination, sacrifice, delayed gratification. Some people don't have that, but they got potential. So we have to be careful of the tree we're barking up.
Keeley, I was going to end it there, but there has been one good question come in, which I think is very relatable to yourself. And if you can keep the answers short, then I'd appreciate that. But it's come from Patricia. How do we help someone who has just been released from prison to cope with this lockdown?
What do they want for themselves? What do they want for themselves? They would have been working on them. They should have been well, depends how self-motivated they were. But what did they do in prison? What did they come away with? If they just sat in their cell on bang up, then, you know, prison is a wonderful opportunity to develop yourself if you have the mind for it. The best thing to do for anyone released from prison is, what were their pre-release plans? What plans did they have for themselves? Often people let probation plan for them and they make no plans for themselves. So what you're trying to gauge is internal motivation. What often happens with prisoners is they have external motivation. Probation said I should do this. Probation said I should do that. Okay, cool. But what do you think for yourself? What is that person going to do to overcome his risk factors? I could talk prison all day. So it's always got to go back to, what does that person want for themselves? And be careful, you know, we want to encourage people, but we don't want to enable people. We don't want to become an enabler. We want to assist, but sometimes, you know, we have to be careful because we're trying to drag somebody along to change, and sometimes they don't want to change.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Keeley. So I'm going to draw that to a close. But I'd just like to end by saying a massive thank you to Keeley. I know that she's provided us with a lot of time and expertise there. And there's some really great comments down the right-hand side that I'm seeing come in. So lots of thank yous. So Keeley, do you want to say any very quick last words?
You know, I have worked really hard to remain authentic and true to myself. And, you know, for all my tutors along the way, they've always encouraged me to just remain true to myself. And authenticity is the antidote. You know, so many people are depressed because they're not their authentic self, you know, and I'm about encouraging people, be you in all your diversity, in all your greatness. Find a way to remain true to yourself.
Brilliant. Okay, so that concludes today's session. I'm going to quickly say that we've got our 4th alumni webinar next Wednesday. This time it's going to be at 2 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. and the presenter is going to be our Alumni of the Year, Dev Aditya, and he's going to be presenting on Pitching Like a Pro. So if you can join us, and we'd love to see you again. Otherwise, we hope that you all stay well, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.